Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so you're in Bali, and what time is it there now?
I am. It's 10 p.m. at night.
God bless you. That is like the middle of the night for me. 8,
You know,
8, 8 a.m. my time.
over the years living here, I've learned that I have to make some sacrifices if I want to have calls with people on your side of the world, but I have a limit. I would say like 10 p.m. is my max these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah, I think when we had our little pre-interview chat, I think we ended at like 11 and I was like, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's right. It's 11 o'clock your time. You need to go to bed.
Yeah.
That was so funny. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you. We're going to talk about your story, how you got sober. And you got sober differently than I did. There's sort of like this alternative way to get sober. So I am, and people love hearing about this. People are like, the traditional way sucks. Give me the new way. So we'll talk about the new way, and then maybe some thoughts that you're starting to open up to. I think you had a really interesting experience with Tommy Rosen's group, and I want to hear all about that. That sounds like an amazing retreat. I mean, the we're going to be talking about next level sobriety. Sort of like the theme will be about like what sustains sobriety, because I think a lot of people, they get sober and then there's the sober drift, right? It's like maybe your old ways of thinking start coming back in. Maybe people in your environment return to doing whatever they were doing. And so it's easy to drift away from the thing that got you sober. But I like to start off with a little game called the lightning round, which is very slow. But when you first when you first got sober, maybe sober curious, were there any books that helped you on your journey?
Yes, the very first one I read was The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober. And I just remember it was life changing. It was life changing
Really?
because
Why?
I just didn't know that there were other people out there who were experiencing the same struggles as me. And that was the first time I read someone's story that felt similar to mine.
Yeah. I've heard such good things about that one. I haven't read that, but I think it's really important for people to know that it's actually like sobriety is actually super awesome. It's not about giving things up. It's about developing a life with intention that's full of joy. So the unexpected joy of being sober, that's awesome. Do you have a like a go-to mantra or quote or sort of theme that has sort of sustained you throughout your journey? I keep using that word journey, but sobriety does feel sort of like a journey, doesn't it?
J word. I love that.
Journey.
Gosh, I don't know if I have one mantra that has sustained me the whole time.
Or
Um,
maybe even a better question is sort of like what's working you now. I feel like there are some ideas that are there's always something that's kind of working me, kind of taking me to the next level.
Well, I'm going to share what comes to mind, which I don't know if this really relates to my sober journey, but I'm sure it does in a way. So I'm leading a yoga teacher training right now. I was telling you about which there's
Yeah.
15 sober women that are here. And the mantra that I keep repeating or I keep posting on my Instagram is you belong here.
Ooh.
And I think that's such a common theme, or at least it was for me, was like not feeling a sense of belonging or community or feeling part of something. And it came up on the first night where someone had said, on the last retreat, I didn't feel like I belonged. And so that's has inspired me always being like, you belong here, you belong here. And I keep saying it to my group. And I think that can speak to, I mean, I guess it could speak to sobriety in,
Oh,
you
it's
know, you
huge.
belong in the rooms, you belong in the communities, you belong no matter how you're showing up.
No, that's huge. It's so interesting because over the years I've been sober. I go to, been to a lot of meetings, and that's like without question the reoccurring theme is I grew up, I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere, right? Or like walking around this earth in a meat suit and I didn't get the rule book.
Yeah.
It's like everybody seems to know what they're doing and I don't fit in. It's so interesting. So when that person shared that they felt like they didn't belong, what do you think that meant for them? Or did you have that experience as well, feeling like you didn't belong? And how did that change?
Yes. Um, Yes, absolutely. And it was interesting that she brought it up because she was actually on my retreat when she had that experience. I know what retreat she's talking about, and a lot of it was a bit beyond my control because I had a third party tour company that was there was a lot going on the retreat, but I'm aware coming out of it that we didn't foster that same connection that is typical of a retreat that I offer. And because she's been on 4 of my retreats in
Oh,
the past
wow.
year, so she could feel the difference. And that was really interesting for me to
Hmm.
get that feedback. And obviously it didn't turn her off because like here she is back again. But it demonstrated to me how important it is to make that a priority, like to foster a safe space where people feel like they can communicate their wants, their needs, their feelings, their everything. Because if that safe space isn't there, then it's not going to be a transformative container. And that really, I'm glad she said it, even though it was like painful for me. I'm not surprised by it based on like my experience as a leader of that offering. And it really helped me guide some of the choices I made on this retreat. And it's funny because a choice I made without even talking to her was, I have 16 women here. And I was like, I just don't want this cliquey thing to happen. And so on the first night, I had them paint their name tags. And then there's people whose jobs it is to mix up the name tags as if we're like guests at a wedding at the table. There's different name tags on different plates every night.
Oh,
And I
good.
love it because then no one's coming down and choosing like the same people to sit beside, and we're all mixing around the table. And
Right.
I think it's like little things like that that can create a sense of belonging where people don't feel like they're left out and they're like looking around the room like who's going to be my friend. And
Yeah.
so that her feedback to me really highlighted like that how important that sense of belonging is in all spaces.
Yeah, this is like an example of why it's important that like we do community stuff because that's how issues arise and that's
Mhm.
how we get to work it out. We get like it needs to come up so that we can deal with it and learn something about ourselves and each other, right? And you mentioned setting an intention and creating safety. Man, those are like the most important ingredients for personal growth because when people don't feel safe, they don't share, they don't get vulnerable, they don't learn. So that's, I mean, what a gift that that lesson was revealed and good for you for taking it so well and working with her on that too. Now this retreat's going to be super awesome. What a great
Yeah.
idea. Do you, what is you, listen, I know you're a yoga girl because you're the Sober yoga girl, but tell me what your, obviously yoga is included in that, but what does your self-care routine look like? Is it like a morning practice? Is it like a weekly? I'm sure retreats are part of your practice. What does that look like for you?
So what's essential for me in every day? I actually have um these the S's that I have.
Yeah.
And so one of them is sadhana, and sadhana in Sanskrit means practice. So having a daily spiritual practice, usually that's like a yoga, a postural practice. And then the word seva in Sanskrit means service. And so every day I try to do one act of service, like just an act of kindness
Yeah.
for people in my community because it makes me feel good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I have sadhana, seva, steps. Steps is one of them. I do 10,000 steps every single day. And that really helps me just having some kind of like
Mm.
cardio fitness. What am I missing here? Oh, svadhyaya. Svadhyaya means self-reflection. And so I do some kind of self-reflection, whether it's reading or journaling or something like that. And then the last one is satsang, and satsang in Sanskrit means community. And so I want to do something in community every day. And it doesn't have to be, it usually lines up. Like, obviously, right now I'm in the middle of a retreat. So I'm in community all day, every day. But when I am not hosting, like, I'll maybe reach out to a friend and go for a walk with them. And then that will do 2 things, like my steps and my.
Yeah.
So those
Oh,
are
it's like
my.
you habit stacking. So
Exactly.
efficient. I love it. No, that's really, I love this because it sort of like speaks to all the components, right? And I'm a firm believer. It's like, I don't care how you get those components, but those are really the things, the body, the service, the self-reflection, community, the connection. Those are all the things that we need to sustain our sobriety and, continue. I think that really supports growth too. Like we're always growing and evolving. So, that's brilliant. I love all the S's. You're gonna have to send me an email with all the S's so I don't spell wrong. I was like, I gave up. I was like, oh no. I'm not gonna be able to spell all that. Excellent. Okay, well that I feel like that's enough for the lightning round. But let's talk about let's talk about how we got here. Like maybe tell me a little bit about what life was like growing up, a little bit about your family.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, and I grew up in kind of midtown, downtown Toronto. For the longest time, I thought I had a pretty normal childhood, and I think I did. Honestly, I had a sister and two parents that were married, and they got divorced when I was 21, and they really
Oh,
probably should
they
have.
hung in there for a long time.
They hung in there for a very long time,
21.
a
Is
bit
your
too
sister
long.
older or younger than you?
She's older.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they hung in there for you guys, probably, right?
They really did. And
Yeah.
I honestly, I mean, I know that they were doing the best they could, but I really think um what I then experienced was a really unhealthy home environment where they were really unhappy. And
Yeah.
there was a constant stress energy in the house. And I was fortunate they weren't really arguing actively around us. That's not what it was, but it was a just kind of a passive aggressive energy and a disconnect, and there I didn't really see love, and so
Mhm.
that was just normal for me. And I don't think it's that uncommon. I think lots of people have different experiences like this in their childhood home.
Yeah, a friend of mine, her parents were like that. She called them the Bickersons because they were always, not fighting, but like bickering all the time. And there was that tension, the understated energy of tension in the air. And it was really just the absence of love and compassion. And That's
That's it.
a that's a tough environment to grow up in. It has its challenges. It's so interesting because, like I come from divorced parents and the divorce was really hard, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like it's either your parents have a healthy, loving relationship and everything else.
Mm.
Divorce, they stay together and it's not good. So that can leave. So what did that do to your identity or your sense of safety and self-esteem?
I guess I didn't feel from my childhood, I don't remember it being so big, but I just remember towards the time of my parents when they started to really experience conflict and started to kind of, it felt like they were lost in their own dynamic when I was a teenager. And it felt almost like no one was really noticing what I was doing. And
Oh yeah.
I'll give you one example, which I don't think I've actually never really spoken about this, but um, I remember one night, like my mom traveled a lot for business. And so she would be out of the city often or the country, and my dad would be at home with me when I was a kid. And I remember when I was young it was fun because my dad would just like take me to the pizza shop or whatever. But when I was a teenager, and I don't even know if he was aware of this, but there were times that it was like school nights and I would have my friends over and we'd be drinking alcohol, and my house was tiny and it was like a Tuesday night, and I'm like, I don't know if my dad knew this was happening and was just pretending he didn't know, or he was just that disengaged or absent with his parenting. Like, I don't know, but I have these memories of me being 17, 18 and getting drunk on like a Tuesday with my friends,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
it just felt like no one was noticing me. And I was doing these things and I would drink inside my own room too, like on my own. And it just felt like my parents were not
Mm.
really noticing. And it felt like my teachers weren't really noticing either, actually. I was a top kid and I was highly achieving. I was the editor of the school.
Oh,
So I did a lot, But there were occasions where I showed up completely wasted to a school dance, and I think my teachers knew and they just pretended they didn't because it's easier to just,
Yeah.
pretend than to deal with it. And I think that was a lot of my high school years was people were just kind of pretending they didn't notice my felt a little bit like spiraling.
So this is really interesting because it's like the kids that get good grades and they're not a problem per se are often the ones that feel it seems like they slip through the cracks because
Yes,
the teachers are all and parents are so overburdened with responsibility that it's like, well, at least they're getting good grades. She's, not causing a problem.
totally.
So, but that had to, on some level, damage your self-esteem in the sense it's like, why isn't anybody noticing? Why isn't anybody calling me out on this?
Totally. And I don't think,
But
I don't think I understood it consciously at that time. Like, I
no,
think I'm only really processing that right now as we're talking about
I,
it. I think I thought I was just getting away with,
they're like, I'm so smart.
I can remember a time I was 18 and it was like the red and gray day. It was the school kind of football day. And a lot of my friends were smoking weed, but I didn't really smoke weed. So I started drinking alcohol at like 9 a.m. that day. Like I was drunk at school all day. And
Wow.
no one noticed. And I don't know. Maybe I was good at pretending I wasn't drinking, but I
No.
do think that an adult would know.
Yeah, no. I mean, everybody thinks they like, oh, I'm maintaining. I got my shit. Nobody know. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
They're choosing not to look, which is really bizarre. They're probably
Yeah.
like, oh, Alex is a good girl, so we're not gonna get her in trouble.
Totally.
Why,
Yeah.
how old were you when you started drinking?
So I had my first drink when I was 14 and
Man, 14 is like the magic number. Okay, 14. Everybody loses their goddamn mind at 14. Yeah.
yeah, and I actually had a pretty traumatic first drinking experience.
Okay.
Not in I was okay. But I had me and a couple of my friends had taken alcohol from our parents and snuck out to a park. And what was traumatic about it was that one of my friends that I went with became unconscious. And I don't know what happened. I wasn't with her. It was all of a sudden we were together at the end of the night and she was like unconscious in this park. And in my memory, I carried her out of the park alone. Like that's what I remember from this night. And I carried her down the street and a woman came out and called the police. And I stayed with her until the police came and I called my parents. My parents were drinking, so they couldn't pick me up. So I took a taxi home. And that's what I remember. And then I was grounded for 2 months. And I recently got together with a friend from that time. And this would have been, I was 14 years old when that happened. Now I'm 32. So almost 20 years ago. And she said to me, so unfortunately, the woman, the friend who we're talking about, she passed away
Oh,
recently.
she died?
Not that night, but recently she passed away due to mental health struggles, which were probably related
Oh,
to substance use.
oh, okay.
Yeah. But my
Mm.
friend who I sat down with said to me, I have to tell you this story from high school. We were like reliving all these memories. And she said, there was this one night we went to a park and, she got unconscious and I carried her out of the park. And I was there that night. And what we figured out is that it was actually the two of us carrying her together. Like,
Oh, that's funny that neither one of you remembered
but
the other.
neither one of us remembered. And my sister's a social worker. And I went home and I said, this is the craziest thing. And my sister said, it was probably because it was so traumatic for you both and so isolating that your brain, all you remember is
Oh,
just being
yeah.
alone. You don't remember the other person there. And so there were actually two of us walking her down the street. And we only put that together like within the last 5 years.
That is really interesting. Yeah, trauma does really weird things to your memory and how
Yeah.
you experience those situations moving forward. Wow, that is so sad she passed away. And that is
Yeah.
a very traumatic first experience to be responsible for somebody who had passed out. It sounds like alcohol poisoning or she just passed out or whatever. It doesn't take much alcohol when you're first starting out to get into that condition. So
Totally.
so that was, wow, you were off to the races. Did you black out that first night, that first time?
I don't think I did. I would say that I had a pretty all through my drinking, I had a pretty high tolerance. I in terms of most of the time I don't think I often blacked out to a point where I was putting myself in super risky situations. Like I could definitely it escalated. And as I got closer to my sober date, those were my most serious moments where I was not making smart choices or considering making really unsmart choices. But I would say for the majority of my drinking, I could remember most of the night and could safely get home and safely communicate, you know? So it wasn't until right towards the very end where I have memories of nights where I couldn't even tell the taxi driver where my address was, or
Oh, wow. Yeah.
nights where I was really blacking out and piecing together moments. But I think in the early years, it wasn't so bad from what I
Yeah.
remember.
It sounds like you were training from
Yeah.
early with the whole, drinking during the week with your friends. It's interesting
Yes.
that your dad never really called you out on it because I've never met a quiet drunk. Have you?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure you guys were loud. People get loud. So it's interesting that he was like, well, at least they're at home doing it and,
Yeah.
keep an eye on you. Yeah, that's interesting. So why do you think you started drinking? Like looking back.
I think I started it because it seemed like that's what adults did. And I was a teenager and it's what my friends did. So I think the very beginning was just to try and be cool and fit
Yeah,
in,
fit
belong.
in.
belong. Yeah.
Yeah, belonging. Yeah, that seems to be a recurring theme. I feel
Hmm.
like that's during that age, like you don't ever want to stand out. Like all you want to do is blend in
Yeah,
at that
absolutely.
age. So that makes a lot of sense. And when did it start going sideways for you?
So I don't think I was super conscious of it again at the time until looking back, but I think of some pivotal things. Obviously, drinking, I was obviously already really frequently drinking in high school. It was like every weekend thing, definitely in my room by myself at times during the week. And when I went to university, I would say I drank probably 5 nights out of the week all throughout university.
Wow.
When I wouldn't drink, it was because I was hungover or maybe I had exams or something, like it
You had a good
became
reason not to.
became very frequent. And
Uh,
the first time that I really remember having a really problematic relationship around it was when I moved away. So I moved to Kuwait when I was 23. And Kuwait is one of the 10 countries in the world where alcohol is illegal. And so I don't know why I chose this country. But when I moved there, that's when I became very obsessive about I learned how to make it. I started going on dates with men who could get me into embassy properties. I would fly out of the country for the weekend and start drinking at 8 a.m. It's to say because there's no alcohol in Kuwait. But then I had all this stuff I was making in my apartment. I knew all the people who homemade booze around the country. And that's when it became really obsessive for me. And so I think that was really when it really started to get bad. And then when I later moved, so I had a mental health breakdown, but I later moved to Abu Dhabi. And I would say to everyone, people who had never been to the Middle East would say, what's the difference between Kuwait and Abu Dhabi? Why are you so excited? And I would literally say, alcohol's legal there. And then I would follow up with, like, I know that makes me sound like an alcoholic, but I got over to Abu Dhabi and that was it escalated so quickly there. I was there for a year and a half, but there was also a really traumatic thing that happened that I really hadn't processed. And when I look back, it makes perfect sense. The whole series of events that led me to get sober when I did, but it's only really with hindsight, I would say.
Do you want to share that story? I mean, as much as you're comfortable with.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So I ended up basically the short is that I married a guy that I met in Kuwait when I was 25. And he came into my life. he showed up in my yoga class, and how he asked me out was he said, I can get us to a party with alcohol at it. And I said yes. And, a few hours later, I'm at this very fancy party with local people, something I had not experienced in my time working there. And all of a sudden I was in this like whirlpool of a relationship where he was like flying us to Dubai every weekend, and we were drinking all day, and we're eating in Robert De Niro's restaurant. We're staying in five-star hotels, which I could never even imagine myself staying in at
He's
that time.
fancy.
It was very fancy.
He's
And
fancy.
I now understand it as love bombing. I didn't understand it.
Oh, uh-oh.
Yeah. And so
I know what
our
comes after that.
relationship went really, really quickly. And then all of a sudden we're married, like within a year.
Wow.
And I started having deep anxiety, and I didn't know what it was. And
Mm.
at the time, I really blamed myself because I ended up leaving him. I left him about 2 months after we got married. And I had this deep guilt and shame of like, I ruined this man's life. I'm a narcissist. I can't believe I did this. And I carried it for many years. And it's only, again, with many years hindsight, I can look back on that little version of myself and see like I was having a gut feeling of this is wrong and you need to leave. And the fact that I bravely followed that intuition and I left, I would have had a completely different life had I stayed with him. And I think it's very brave when I see where I
Yeah.
am now and where I was then. And I'm proud of that choice. But at the time, it was something I carried a lot of shame about.
Yeah.
And I'll add one interesting tidbit around all of this, which is so me and him break up, life falls apart. I moved to Abu Dhabi. I drink, 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 and get sober about a year and a half later. And I've been working on a book about my sober journey for the last 5 years, but I emailed my ex-husband for the first time in 7 years in December to say to him, hey, I wrote a book. You're in. How do you feel about that? And he replied and said, Alex, you're never going to believe this, but I'm also 5 years sober.
Oh,
And I'm 5 years
what?
sober. And so we had a very short email exchange. He also wrote a book about our experience. The email exchange ended very
Touche.
quickly. He basically just said, I support your book, and it was really nice. And we never followed up, so I don't know the exact details. But if I had to make spiritual meaning of this, it seems like we almost came into each other's lives in order to distract them enough that we both had to get sober. And we got sober on almost the exact same timeline without even realizing it.
That is
And
wild.
and that's just wild to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I firmly believe that pe relationships are our best teachers. Like we learn through relationship. Like it brings up all your stuff. What was the trigger? Because 2 months isn't a very long time. What was the trigger that you decided that you were like, I got to get out of here?
So in those 2 months, my entire mental health fell apart. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, I was having nightmares. I was drinking a lot to kind of numb things out. And I think what probably really triggered it was just having this space and distance. And that's interesting because I find that always helps me nowadays, but I wasn't aware of it. So in the week before I broke up with him, I actually had flown home to Canada for like 7 days to see my family. And it was that. It was like the physical distance of just being on the plane and being out of our home and having time to seriously reflect away from his energy, which was always in my space previously. And I find that with anything, if you're trying to make a decision about something that's weighing on you, finding a way to get out of your normal environment and away can just help bring a clarity that you wouldn't get if you're close up looking at it.
Yeah, it does kind of break the spell, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because I do hypnosis in my practice, and what I learned about hypnosis is that your environment sort of hypnotizes you into these behavior patterns, right? It's sort of an energy, it's a behavior pattern, and anytime you feel stuck or have a challenge, you're right, getting into a different environment sort of resets everything. Like you have to, like getting out of your environment, you sort of maybe consciously or unconsciously are scanning your body, like how do I feel? How do I think? Like new ideas can come in, and it sort of like breaks that sort of hypnosis of your regular life and gives you a fresh perspective. Was that relationship, was it violent in nature? Was it toxic, controlling? Like, what was it about it that, because it did sound like you guys were sort of a bit of an explosion for each other.
You were. It was not violent at all, thankfully. But there were some behaviors which I now see as very controlling or things that I wouldn't tolerate as nowadays in a relationship. That being
Hmm.
said, there was also a cultural difference because he came from Mexico and I was from Canada. And so what would be normal in his culture would not be normal in mine and vice versa. But there are things that happened, like, for example, there was one night when I, probably about 10 days before we broke up, where I was very distressed. I just couldn't stop crying. And he said to me, you have to decide whether it's me or your new job, and just go into the bedroom and stay there until you decide tonight, like come out and make a decision. And I did it. I did it. When people tell me that, when I tell people that story, they're kind of shocked. And
They do what I just did. I was like, what the fuck?
exactly the face you made. Yeah. And that was only the beginning, right? That
Yeah,
was the beginning. We
I'm
had
half
been
Mexican. I get it.
Yeah, we had been married for 5 weeks at that point. And it just was, and I couldn't even name my finger on what felt wrong about that. But
Mm.
what feels wrong to me many years later is that if your partner is distressed, it should be like,
How
you
can I
know,
support you?
how can I support you? Can we get you to a counselor?
What does
Can we,
your process look like?
yeah, exactly. Not like go in that
Please
room.
conform into my process. Your feelings are not working for me.
Yes, that was it. My feelings were not working for him. That was it. That was it. And that was a big one. And then there was another thing which I just processed very recently, which I was,
Mm.
the other night I was talking to my students about this. Like they were asking me, what someone said your life would be very different if you were still with him. And I said, well, I would have
I,
gone to the United States because he decided that he wanted to do a master's degree at in the United States and was applying to do a master's. And he never asked me, like, do you want to go to the United States? It was just like, this is what's next.
yeah.
And that would be another example of me being like, it was like all of a sudden I was married. He was like, well, of course you're going to come with me. You're my wife. And I was like, oh my God. And now I understand, in an equal relationship, it should be like, okay, well,
So I'm
this is
thinking
what
about
I
doing.
want. Yeah, and it's okay to go separate ways if that's not the same path. And my path was never to go back to North America after I fell in love with being overseas. I didn't want to go back there, and I was just following him. And it really should be a discussion and an agreement and a compromise, and not just you have to do what I want to do because I'm the husband.
Yeah, what you're describing to me sounds like like to participate in that would be a practice in self-betrayal, to like
Mhm.
totally shut down the very essence of who you are. And it says something about you that you were like, no, like, and a mental breakdown, that means different things to different people, but ultimately it's like your spirit was dying, and there was a part of you that says, I'm not doing this. I am no longer willing to participate in my self-betrayal.
Mhm.
And that's amazing. That's amazing you had it in you. And look
Thank
at you now.
you.
Well, tell me about the process how you got sober, because you kind of got sober. I'm a traditional girly. There, 30 years ago there wasn't anything else. There was like that. It was that there was one way to do it when I got sober. But how did you get sober? So you like maybe walk me first through the decisions. Like how did you decide that you needed to practice abstinence? And then what was your path?
Yeah. So at the time that I realized I needed to get sober, I started Googling how to quit drinking. And the amazing algorithms started putting it on my Facebook. And that was in the form of an organization called 1 Year No Beer,
Oh,
which was
Andy. Yeah.
with Andy. I love
Was it?
Andy.
Yeah. He was on
Mhm.
the podcast. I love him.
Oh, amazing. He is an incredible
Such a,
person.
yeah. I was like, dude,
Incredible.
you're different. You are just different. He's like such a good person.
Yeah. Yeah. He was actually on
Andy
my
Ramage.
podcast, one of the
Yeah.
first episodes.
Oh,
Yeah.
was he?
Yeah.
He's so cool. Andy
So
Ramage, 1 Year No Beer. So you did that?
I did. So I was seeing the ads and I was reading the stories. And what made it very relatable to me was that everyone whose story was highlighted felt like me. They were all just,
Ah,
they described themselves as a person who just had a couple too many beers at the pub with their friends. And to me, that was what I thought my issue was. Like, obviously, as
of
we
course.
described, it was much more than that. But this felt very relatable, and it was 28 days or 90 days or 1 year. So I signed up for the 28-day challenge, and my withdrawal when I went alcohol free, but I had so much shame around it. Like I had so much shame. So I didn't want people to know what was going on. I didn't even want to join the 1 Year
Mm.
No Beer Facebook group. But I just remember having really serious mental health experiences, like just spiraling panic and depressive mood. And it was actually the second time in my life when I remember experiencing suicidal thoughts. The first
Oh,
time
wow.
being, at the end of this marriage. And then the next time was in my early sobriety. But there was something in me that just knew that it was going to get better and it was going to be okay. I had this faith. I don't know what it was. And I just kept doing the next right thing. And eventually I got over the shame and I joined the Facebook group. And that was the game changer. I would sit on that group all day and just read people's posts. And I became really active, and I also got deeper into my yoga practice. And so
I'm
it
sorry to
was,
interrupt you, but when you were participating in the Facebook group and reading, were you also sharing?
so I didn't share until day 14.
Okay, that's not bad. That's not very
Yeah.
long.
I was
Okay.
too afraid to share. And then when I shared my first few posts, I started getting overwhelming support from
Mm,
people. And that
mm,
was huge. And that was actually pivotal for me to start to get rid of my shame and to
yeah.
story tell.
Hmm.
And it's actually one of the reasons why my whole life changed. So at 60 days sober, they reached out to me, the founders 1 Year Beer, and asked if they could make my story be one of the testimonials.
Yay.
And I waited for 30 days to make this decision because I knew if my story becomes a Facebook ad, everyone is going to know. And I didn't want everyone to know, but I wanted to help people. And so I sat on it for 30 days. And then I decided, you know what? I would like to do this. And so I'm going to do it from my own page first. So that way it comes from me and it's not gossip that people are spreading, like, oh, did you see Alex is on this thing? Blah, blah, blah. I
Mhm.
was like, I'm just going to post it myself. And that to me was like the pivotal moment because I did that and I got support. And then I started doing it more and more and more. And in the beginning, it was just a little bit of like, oh, I'm 6 months sober. Things are great, And then I realized how much it was resonating with people, and it slowly started to become a real focus.
Yeah.
And I realized how universal the struggle is with alcohol.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So universal. And there's so much shame. So nobody, people aren't really talking about it. People don't want to talk about it until they
Oh,
have to, until they have to. And I'm glad that you found a place where you felt safe. Like we were talking earlier about there needs to be safety.
yeah.
We need to meet people where they're at. So I like this idea of, Andy's approach. I forget what his partner's name is or was at the time. I don't think they're working together anymore.
It was Rory
Roy.
Fairbank.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I like this idea that we meet people where they're at. And so not everybody, identifies with the, explosion of your life that alcoholism can be. That's where it was at. So I was like, yep, sign me up. But not everybody's like that, right? So there's um because it becomes a sudden realization, like actually a slow realization over time. It's like, wow, this is really a bigger problem than I thought I was. It's like I thought I was maintaining or I thought I was managing. But as it turns out, no. Like and the detox part is a little alarming because depending on how much you're drinking, I mean, hopefully they have a little disclaimer, like if you're watch out for these symptoms. Alcohol detox can be, fatal depending on the quantities and stuff. But so it's been 5 years since you participated in the 1 year no beer.
Yeah. So I signed up for April 2019. My sober date is April 13th. And
Oh, nice.
I initially wanted to do a 28 day challenge. I think I realized by day maybe 7 that I needed to do 90 days. And
Yeah.
I remember posting, I think it was on day 21. On day 21, I went out on a first date with a guy and he was trying to encourage me to drink. And I said no. And I posted about it in the Facebook group. And I think it was in that post that I wrote, I didn't want him to know that this would probably be for the rest of my life or something. And so it
Oh,
was
yeah.
very quickly into it within a couple weeks that I realized like I want to be sober for the rest of my life.
Yeah. 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 You did enough experimenting.
Mhm.
Like, like I'm good. I don't need to do this anymore. So tell me what life is like, has been like since then, because it's like, it's so interesting because I often think that, part of getting sober is developing a new identity, and when I came across your podcast and your information, I think it was a while ago. I think you and I connected a year ago, and I don't know what I had like squirrel disease, where I was like, oh, look at that shiny object. But um uh, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. I think maybe too much drugs when I was in my but it's developing a new identity, right? It's like you show up, we show up to these rooms. Like I showed up to the rooms, like I was completely self-centered, but incapable of self-examination. And the process of getting sober was, for me, it was a process of shedding this old identity of party girl and developing this new identity. And
Yeah.
like the new identity kind of unfolded, right? But part of that was like, I'm sober girl now, right? Um, and it sounds like that you had a similar experience of developing this new identity. So when did you start like you had your Instagram is sober girl or sober yoga girl? Oh my God, I can't even speak.
You got it.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, Sober Yoga Girl podcast is my podcast. And
Yay.
I started, when did I start everything? So, around 30 days sober, I met a psychic who said to me, you're not supposed to be a teacher. You're supposed to be a healer. You're going to have a retreat center one day and
Really?
run retreats around the world. Yeah. And
Oh my
so
God.
this to me
Wow.
was the pivotal moment of my entire life. And what it really was I think I didn't mention earlier in the story, but I found yoga when I was in my late teens, like 18
Oh,
or
okay.
19. And I started practicing from a really young age. So I'd been teaching yoga already and was like very deep into it. And I was doing that all through this time. And this psychic said to me, yeah, you're going to do like retreats around the world. And this to me was probably the pivotal moment of my life because I all of a sudden believed in myself. And I was like, if Dan says it's going to happen, then it's going to happen. And so I got very, very focused on building this. And it's so interesting the way life happens because this was in 2019 and shortly after we know what happened, which is the COVID pandemic, and that flung me into the online world. And I wasn't really planning on becoming like a sober influencer per se, but
Yeah.
I had built up this community of people curious about sobriety through 1 year no beer, through me just posting in the group. And that really quickly moved to an online Zoom sober yoga community. And so that's where
Nice.
everything began in 2020. I was doing 1 year no beer yoga. I would get on a Zoom call. I had no idea what I was doing, just have a bunch of sober people on Zoom and like ask them about their sober journey and then teach a yoga class. And from there, I built it into my own business, like the Sober Girls Yoga 30 and 60 day challenges was where it started. And
Mhm.
that grew very quickly. And there was a very dedicated group of people practicing yoga with me through the pandemic who later were my first cohort of yoga teacher training students online. And so that was really where it began. And it, within a year and a half, I could quit my job as a teacher. So that's what I was doing in the Middle East. I was a school teacher, and my company grew so quickly that I resigned from my job and then I came to Bali. And
That's
from
amazing.
here, it's been a slow build here, but I teach yoga retreats. I lead my own. I also teach on a lot of sober retreats. So it seems to be the destination for sober groups right now. So
Yeah,
I've taught
yeah.
for like Soba Sistas, Sobriety Sisterhood. My friend Rory he's in Australia. He has a Vedic meditation program for sobriety, and I'm teaching on his retreat this fall. And so it's been a big a great opportunity for me to get involved there. And then, like I said, I do these in-person yoga teacher trainings in Bali. So I was faculty for a school for a long time, and now I'm really focusing on my own school. And we have 16 women here in Bali right now, 13 students, and 3 are my alumni who've come back to support me in leading the program. And it just really feels like I'm the happiest I've ever been, and I've really stepped into my
Wow.
purpose.
Ooh, girl, that is big. Purpose. I feel like sobriety is just the beginning, but it's
Mhm.
required so that you can really identify your purpose. Because that, after that, it's like, well, now what? Right? It's like I'm
Absolutely.
sober, now what? And but really being sober is the key to finding purpose in life. And I think it's beautiful that you not only found your purpose, but you're really helping other people find theirs as well, which is super important. And we were going to talk about the sober drift a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what you do to sort of stay motivated and stay close. Is it the lifestyle that you've set up for yourself that you're like completely immersed in it?
I think the lifestyle, absolutely. But I will share one thing that I find really important is to keep going to meetings. So even if, like, especially in time periods when I'm not hosting a retreat, because my life can be very full on. I was telling you
Mhm.
before we started recording, it's 21 days, 13 hours a day for these students. I'm living in the retreat center. So it's very full on, but then they leave. And it's just like, like they're gone
Yeah.
and I'm alone for whatever period of time until the next group comes in. And in those empty periods, I find it very important that I'm showing up to meetings, that I'm hosting meetings,
Okay.
and that I'm just staying engaged. And I lead sober challenges. And then I'll jump on to we mentioned the Recovery 2.0 and Tommy
Tell
Rose.
me, yeah.
And I jump into his meetings a lot when I'm doing nothing at like 8 p.m. on a Monday, just to get in community and to remember why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I love Tommy. He was on the podcast too. He's been doing such great work for so long, and he's got such deep wisdom. Yeah, and it was interesting. The Recovery 2.0, I felt like it was a good sort of reframe of the traditional 12 steps. And you had sort of mentioned that you had sort of a shift in perspective. Is that fair around 12 step
Um, yeah.
ideas? What was that like for you?
So I'll tell you about that. So I signed up for the Recovery 2.0 retreat
In
this March
India?
in India
That's so
with
amazing.
I had zero knowledge about Recovery 2.0. I just had Tommy on my podcast. I followed him on Instagram. I thought he seemed cool. And his India trip ended 2 days before my India trip began. And so I saw that as a sign, he's in India, I'm in India. I should just do his retreat.
Yeah,
And so I signed up and I showed up there and I
that's
had no
amazing.
idea that it was like really a 12-step retreat.
You're, oh, uh-oh.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, I've never been in a meeting before. Like, what do I do? And it turns out that it's like very similar to the meetings I host. It's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
holding space for people to share their story. But I
yeah.
did get to learn a lot about the different steps, and I was able to make connections to my life. Like, for
Mhm.
example, I learned about the fourth step, which is making an inventory, right? An
Mhm.
inventory of your life. And someone explained it to me as writing their story and sharing their
Mhm.
story. And I thought to myself, that sounds like a lot of what I did when I wrote my book. And
Oh, yeah.
and so making these connections of how I had done the steps without even maybe being aware of them in different ways.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I saw how incredibly how impactful it had been on the people in the room. And I want to say also being around men who had been through the steps was big for me because I saw how that had allowed them to be vulnerable and to share their truth and to be able to sit with women sharing their truth. And I hadn't really experienced that kind of male presence in my life. I told you earlier
Oh,
about my dad who didn't really seem to notice what was
yeah.
going on with me. And so to be with men who could hold me
Mhm.
as I shared my truth in a really loving way, and I started to see like the 12 steps really had a benefit on the people that had been
Yeah.
part of it. And so I actually left, and I have a sponsor now through Recovery 2.0. And
Oh, nice.
yeah, and so I want to say I'm working in steps, but like very slowly because
Yeah.
we've mostly just been like connecting over the phone and sharing. I
Yes.
wouldn't say we're
Yeah.
there yet, but I'm very open to it now. And I think
Good.
there's so many different tools, and it's whatever works for you.
Yeah, and to be fair, you did mention in the beginning the all your S's were a lot of the components, but
Yeah.
for me, like the most magical steps were the fourth step and the ninth step. And then fourth step was really, as I understand it, the way I did it and the way it's described in the book is you get really specific about the people that you're like, you identify the people that you're resentful at. And some people struggle with the word resentment. So sometimes it's the people who caused you pain or made you sad or whatever. But, for this conversation, we'll just say resentful. And then getting really specific about the cause. Because it's so easy to be like, they did this and they did that and blah, blah, blah. And then you have 10 things on the table and it's really hard to sort it all out. So you got really specific about the cause and then how it affected you. Like, did it cause financial insecurity? Did it damage your self-esteem? Did it affect your personal relationship with that person? There's a variety of different, it's very specific ways that we're affected by the specific cause, right? It's cause and effect. And then the last part is to identify what your part was, because in every interaction, it's like a 50-50, like, and it's so interesting because I had such a victim mindset. I thought all these people were being assholes to me. And then when I got to the cause, I realized I was behaving in ways that provoked negative responses from people, or I continued to show up for relationships that were abusive, and that was an act of self-betrayal, which is kind of why I keyed into the whole self-betrayal and self-abandonment thing because I did that. And once I recognized, and then I started seeing all these patterns of behavior. And it was like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right. And it was so life altering for me to be able to identify where I could take responsibility and what I could let go of. And man, when I did my fifth step with my sponsor, which is when I shared it all, it's not really telling your story. Like the story comes out, but it's a very pragmatic and very practical way to sort of unpack all your baggage. And people are so afraid to do it. But I always tell people, you know what? It's license to bitch. Like you get to talk about how all these people did you wrong and how they hurt you. And you have a captive audience. They have to listen to all your bullshit. But at the end, at the end, you gain all these insights and just sort of dump it all. It's like confession, right? And then I never felt so high sober as I did when I dropped my fourth step. It was
Mm,
so freeing. It was such a magical experience for me. And then the ninth step when I recognized that I needed to clean up some of my past stuff that I felt guilty about, that I needed to take responsibility for and really own. And I mean, there's this saying in 12 step of like, how free do you want to be? Right? It's like, how far do you want to take this thing? Because it could take you the sense of freedom that is the experience of freedom at the end of it is so amazing. But it's how much courage do you have? Like, how much do you really want to dig into causes and like cause and effect, causes and conditions, they call it. So I'm excited for you. I think I will have maybe we'll have to do another interview when you're all done to hear about how this experience was for you. But I'm glad that you were able to start at a place that made sense with Andy and Rory, was it?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The 1 year no beer. I mean, I love, to be honest, I really love all these different modalities that have come about because frankly, it doesn't work for everyone. Like everyone needs to start out at a different place. So I totally get it. But listen, you're doing such magical work. So tell me, so you're still doing, obviously you're doing the yoga teacher training, but you still do retreats too?
I do retreats. Yeah. I have the Sober Girls Yoga India trip is happening next year as well.
Next year,
And
there's time to register.
there's time. Yep. It's in March and it's
Okay.
kind of an epic. I call it the Sober Girls Yoga Adventure to India because kind of an epic
To
adventure.
India.
Mhm. So we do
Okay.
Delhi, we go to the Taj Mahal, we
Oh,
visit Jaipur, the Pink City, and then we fly down to Goa and spend a few days in Goa, which is kind of like a tropical island, or it's not an island, but it's tropical island vibes in the south of India. So that's what that looks like. It's a 10-day trip in March of 2025. And we already have half the spots gone. So there's 5 spots left. It's limited at 10 women because it is so India
that's a
is
lot.
chaotic,
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
of chaotic travel. So we're keeping it small this year so
Okay.
that we can really build that community in our
And
group.
what do they do when they're on, like you travel and I'm sure you do a little sightseeing and stuff, but what is it like workshopy kind of a thing?
Yeah. So it is every single day there's yoga with me. And then every single evening, usually, depending on what's going on, but usually there is a yin yoga, some kind of workshop, a sober circle, a sharing circle. So there will be a topic of discussion and a share and connect about that.
Is it a different topic every night or is there a theme for the week?
It's usually just different based on sort of what
Oh,
is arising in the group or what feels
yeah.
needed. Or I
I
often have
love
followed the
that.
framework of the chakras. Are you familiar with the
Uh,
chakras from yoga?
Vaguely. I mean, I've just seen the rainbow circles on a body.
Yep.
I don't really know.
So I'll just briefly go over it because a lot of my work is based in this. So, for example, like the root chakra is about being grounded, safety and security. Sacral is emotions and boundaries and letting go and going with the flow. And solar plexus is empowering and believing in yourself. And the heart is like healing and forgiveness. The throat is speaking your truth and being authentic. And then we have the third eye and then the crown. And the third eye is really about trusting your intuition
Ooh.
and the crown is about connecting to a higher power. And so often I will follow this framework for my retreats as well. Like if I have a 7-day retreat, it will be the 7 chakras. And then I will have a journal prompt and a discussion and a workshop around that. And my yoga class will be
Ooh.
themed around that as well. And I've just found it's easy, it works, people love it. So
Girl,
that is
I love a journal prompt. I love a worksheet. Ask me the questions. Yeah, that's amazing. Oh, I love that. And I love the idea of allowing a theme or a topic to emerge based on, who's there, like what is arising. Because don't you find that the people that come together will often have very specific, similar situation. I don't know how that happens. It seems it's so weird, but it's like the people who need to come together. It's like the vibe, the energy is out there and people are drawn. And it's really interesting how specific scenarios or situations can arise. People just connect. It's amazing.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, where can they go to register for this?
Yes. So I'll share the link with you, but it's the mindfullifepractice.com is our website. And then I believe it's probably adventure to India or India retreat. I can't remember what the
It'll
what
be
the
obvious, I'm sure.
it'll
Yeah.
be obvious. If you go to the website, you can find like retreats under the heading and India is there.
I love the idea of the India retreat, like any kind, like we were talking about, get out of your environment, get a reset, get a fresh perspective, get your heart full, maybe release a bunch of stuff that you no longer need and find the courage to step into your authenticity. It sounds amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're doing such good work, and I'm excited to be on your podcast pretty soon. I'll share it out with my audience, but thank you for staying up late with me and sharing your story. My heart is full. You're doing such good work, and You're doing a great
Thank you.
job.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Arlena. It was amazing.
Yeah, we'll talk again real soon.
Sounds good.